welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International as we enter our fourth matchup of the day between Method EU and No Girls Allowed. The titans of the first season here, Method EU, won every single online cup play, but came a little short in the LAN in Australia. So, Sloot, as we're looking at this one, you feel like there's a little bit of a chip on their shoulder that's kind of countering a little bit of that exhaustion that's coming up from going from the world first race directly into practice again?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a bit of kind of exhaustion playing WoW so much. We just talked about that. But, I spoke to, I know these guys. I know, Mike, Gingy, Ken, Zaley. I know a lot of these guys. I've known them for years. And a couple of them, all of them were, but a couple of them were very, very beat up about the fact that Method NA, they just weren't feeling it that day. Something was off. They said it before the series even started. They're like, practice wasn't going well. I don't know what's up. And they ended up getting swept by Method NA. So I think, they took it hard. And I think they're going to be here, contrary to what we might have been talking about with just kind of sitting back and relaxing. I think they want to show that they're still the best team. They want to storm BlizzCon. They want to stomp the competition. They just want to be first all the time.
Without a doubt. And let's talk about their opponents here. No Girls Allowed. It's been another combination of a couple teams we've seen already in the previous season here, Tettles.
Yeah, so it's a combination of the gamer dads. You have Trell and Sistara being from those guys, and then you have Dilemma, Edelweiss, and Dad being from Team Learn to Fly. Their name is kind of a play off of the fact that Edel is in fact a girl participating in the MDI, so that is one of those things that we're looking to see from them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well said, Tettle.
Well said, Tettle.
First match of the day that we're going to be going into, of course, was Shrine of the Storm. We've seen it a little bit already onto this one, Sierra. Now, we saw previously, because this is going to be on teaming, especially, they need to get a lot of count. And it seemed like the teams we've looked at thus far have done a very good job of dealing with those mini bosses that previously nobody got near.
Definitely. What I'm very intrigued to see is they have had a chance to watch what these teams are doing. It's not a lot of time, but potentially they could adjust to what these teams are doing if it wasn't fitting in with their particular strats. But when we look at Motherlode and Shrine, these are two very strong dungeons for Method EU. They feel very confident. They said 2-0. I think that we could maybe see one game go to No Girls Allowed, potentially. It just depends on how they play. Maybe Method EU, if they're a little bit sloppy, then No Girls could take one.
Interesting, and it's kind of a deja vu as well, because previously we've seen a couple times where Gamer Dads was coming into these brackets and going right up against Method EU. So maybe a little bit of nerves on that side, Sloot, or maybe a little bit of relief where they're saying, all right, well, we know who we're going against. Maybe start looking at the lower bracket as well.
Yeah, okay, but you're right. I don't disagree with that at all. But the problem
Thank you. All right.
All right, we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for hanging out tonight. But the thing is, we keep talking about it. You don't have that much time until BlizzCon. If you're one of the lower teams coming into the season just now, you have a lot of points to make up. So your mind cannot be in the loser bracket right off the bat.
It's a fair point. Let's take a look at it as we go into Game 1 on Shrine of the Storm between Method EU and No Girls Allowed.
Sierra here for the first time. Pleasure to be here for your debut casting as we see typical Sierra coming out of both teams right away. They snap the position of all the caster mobs onto that Brazier right now, making sure to get that Enchanted Emissary well punted out of the group.
One of the things that I love to see right here on the side of Method EU, Zalia doing a lot of damage compared to Adel, maybe playing a little more offensively, just a bit more aggressively. I think this is something we're probably going to see throughout the entire dungeon is, although, you might not think healer damage matters, and that is a very common theme perhaps that we've seen on the desks previously. I'm a big fan of it. I love to see healers being aggressive as they possibly can, but not at the detriment of the survivability of their team.
No, not at all. But we know Azalea is a master and absolute lover of being a very aggressive healer. So if the team can pull it off, they've just masterminds in doing it, he will get that advantage wherever he can. But, this time already, right off the bat, a bit costly. Mirrors did proc that cheat death in the pack previous. We did have one of the emissary of the Tides that prevents CC in there. But all trouble here for No Girls Allowed as Trell unfortunately does fall, causing Dilemma to proc his cheat death and finally fall as well. Undad has proc cheat death and fallen too. Sistara starting to follow suit as Edelweiss goes down, and it looks like technically a full team wipe. But a bit of issue here right now on the side of No Girls Allowed. So, that pull went a bit south for them, but I think we have a bit of trouble here, Sarah. So it looks like we're going to have to restart this one for the teams.
All right, and we're going to be coming back to the desk onto that one. Thank you so much on that end, Sloot. Had a bit of technical difficulties, so we are going to be looking at having that restart rolling out in just a second, and then be able to get back into the game as quickly as we can onto that one. And Thankfully, we weren't really too deep into that one, Sloot.
No, I mean, absolutely not. But
thank you so much.
Just off the bat, I mean, we saw it's really hard to read too far into it. Just as you said, Jack, we were just at the beginning of the dungeon, but we already saw a bit of, like mirrors proccing that cheat death, casters going left and right with emissaries of the tides. These are just nasty pulls. We all know that Shrine of the Storm is an incredibly dangerous front-loaded dungeon from a caster perspective. So if you combine an emissary of the tides in there that prevents any interrupts or crowd control within their aura, which is I think 10, 12 yards, something like that, it's just super dangerous.
Very dangerous onto that one, and nothing is really more dangerous than some of the affixes, especially if they're going to be the incorrect ones. So we put into a reset as we'd mistakenly had the wrong affix combination for one of the teams, and just to make sure that they're playing on the affixes that they've been practicing, we're having the reset rolling out. So we're getting everybody reset, getting everything together, making sure it's all going to be correct, and then we'll be hopping back into this one. So we haven't really been able to, as you mentioned, see too much of what's going on so far here, and at that point it starts coming down to how much of the trash are they going to be doing early on, because Tettles, you mentioned previously, a lot of the mob count for these mobs has been buffed up. The percentage that they're going to be giving towards total completion has been buffed up, or in the case of some of the eels at the end, it's been nerfed down.
Yeah, so there was a major trash count rebalancing coming into Shrine of the Storm to where those mini bosses end up giving a pretty sizable amount more count relative to the dungeon. In addition to that, it is also this teaming setting that we actually are seeing whenever the affixes are applied. So it's going to be pretty challenging for the comps to just get full count across the whole entire dungeon without pulling any of these mini bosses, because in seasons past we've actually just seen them avoid them pretty much at all costs because they were incredibly dangerous. A lot of I know Windspeaker Heldis, her Gale has actually gotten its damage nerfed a pretty decent amount as well. It makes it pretty non-dangerous now, so you actually see a lot of teams actually pulling that with Accuseer and using that ward that gives bonus haste in order to be able to get some damage up too. So we're going to see what teams end up doing there.
Yeah, we saw a couple teams pulling that into Aquaser off the start, so very interesting to see if that is going to be what others will follow up and do. But let's check it out right now as we're all set, ready to go between Method EU and No Girls Allowed.
Sierra, fantastic to see here. Of course, for the first time casting this Shrine of the Storm between these two teams. Right off the bat, both teams, as we saw in that previous misstart between them, right on top of that Brazier immediately to make sure that they get all of those mobs snapped on top. Rogues are doing their work with Tricks of the Trade as we see immense amount of damage start piling up here from now the Warrior tank over on Method EU, and of course the Rogues starting to catch up soon. But once again, Sierra, I mean, look at that damage coming out of Azalea.
I just want to stop you there and just focus on Azalea's damage right now. This is absolutely huge. You know, when we talk about healer damage, you maybe think about Disc Priests, you maybe think about Paladins, you more think of Druids as raw healers, but the damage they can do is absolutely massive. You know, you look at the trinkets he's running these very offensive trinkets, traits as well. He's looking to do as much damage as he can, get as much time off that timer as possible. They're doing a very nice pull here, relatively sizable. If you look down on the bottom left of the screen, you can see that they've got the Tide emissary of the Tides out there. Unfortunately, it seems like a few little sloppy deaths, which is not what they want. Frag pocking cheat death. Yep, he's going to go down as well. I think now it's back in the pull. This could still be something salvageable. I don't think this is just going to be the end of it. But this is not what you want. You know, they had a few sloppy mistakes at the beginning of the last try, and it seems to have carried over into this one. Maybe shaky nerves. Maybe they're just not feeling it today.
Yeah, but I mean, that's kind of the thing, you know, because Azalea is so offensive. I mean, he knows how to heal better than most, but, you know, you play kind of a glass cannon, so to speak, in that sense. You kind of overcompensate with the damage, and then you get caught with your tail between your legs. You know, it's hard to place blame on healer or tank there. Usually we just do it on the healer anyway, Sierra. That's just kind of what we do, but now did drop there, causing Azalea to die right after, likely for some healing aggro, and of course Frag followed suit right after that. So they are salvaging the pull, as you mentioned, but in a very sloppy fashion. No Girls Allowed looking great right now. They're already down by Accuseer's room, have started that role playing that RP right now to spawn the boss as they deal with the rest of the trash in front of it, and wasting no time, straight into Accuseer and popping that Bloodlust.
And this is what No Girls Allowed really want. They want to have the Method EU that, you know, that isn't necessarily them on top form, and they're hoping that maybe they can just sneak in. You know, they can make the most of this opportunity that they've been given, and if they carry on at the pace they're going, they could be completely fine. They could even take this. You know, it might be something where we look at Method EU and we just remember this really strong invincible team, but perhaps that, you know, the loss on against Method NA, perhaps it's just knocked them more than potentially we thought. You know, it wasn't even like a 2-3 or 3-2, I guess I should say. It was just a complete wipeout. They didn't even let them take a single game. And for me, you know, this was all about rebuilding confidence for them. This is something where they had been knocked and they're trying to get back up. You know, they're trying to find their form again. And this really isn't going to help them, unfortunately, having these early mistakes and having that near full team wipe.
No, yeah, not the best start for Method EU, but they're doing what they can to claw back into action right now. Zakusu reaches 75% health on their side with 18% trash on the board. No Girls Allowed looking really good here, 22% trash on the board, hitting 60% and getting ready to get to that transition phase. Both teams very aggressively pulling Windspeaker Heldis on top of the boss. We do know that you have that Gale buff on the ground. We can see it right now. The player standing in, it gives you a 25% haste buff, so huge amounts of damage buffed on top of it, but really kind of just makes the healer be so, healers, both of them, be so attentive because of that constant AoE pulsing damage onto the group, Sarah.
Yeah, look inside of Method EU. Doesn't appear they've popped their Bloodlust yet.
Oh, no, they haven't.
Not sure what they're going to be saving that for. I was chatting with Now, and he was indicating to me before we started today, mini bosses. You know, we've talked about this before. It wasn't something that was pulled particularly last season. This season, it seems like, certainly in the teaming setting that we have, it's going to be something that everybody is wanting to be pulling. They want to get that count. I kind of want to see them together. To be perfectly honest, I kind of want to see, I don't know if they want to snap it up or they want to move it down. I'd love to see both of these two mini bosses. I don't know if it would necessarily be something that you bloodlust, though. I feel like you should have used it already, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you can make a case for Sorn plus the Guardian Elemental on the bridge, because then you can use Sorn's aura on the ground to mitigate the AoE damage from the Elemental as well, 70% reduction within that area. But yeah, you know, we talked about this a lot in the previous season, Sarah, about Motherlode. Motherlode was always a point of contention for this whole, why aren't you popping Bloodlust yet? By the time, you know, you finish and wait for your first Bloodlust, you probably could have almost squeezed in another Bloodlust. So, of course, we're not nearly to that level yet with Method E. We're only about 4.5 minutes into the dungeon, so hopefully they're saving it up for something quite significant. I doubt a team of Method E's caliber just kind of forgot about Bloodlust, so they're clearly saving it for something, but hopefully it's something big here, because No Girls Allowed has already finished off with Acusir, the first boss, and has aggressively run down into the tunnels here, into the room containing Windspeaker Sorn, not Runecarver Sorn, excuse me. Pretty substantial pull here coming in from Trell as he line of sights around the pillar, making sure that he grabs aggro on everything coming in.
I mean, it wouldn't be the first time that a top-tier team has forgotten to pop Bloodlust, but as we see on the side of No Girls Allowed, they are doing an absolutely beastie pull. You know, we've seen teams before split this up. In one of the games earlier today, we had it where they didn't pull that pack in the corner, and they let it, I think it was in the Abra game, actually, where they didn't pull that pack in the corner, they let it come in a little bit later, just so they could stabilize, get everything in place. No Girls Allowed really saying, look, don't underestimate us. We are not a team to be messed with. You think you can take this game easily? We're not going to go down without a fight. We are going to make you work for this win.
And you know, the exact same pull on both sides, and finally the Bloodlust comes out of Method EU here in this really substantial pull. Lots of air denial coming down from those Iron Hull apprentices that do massive AoE damage with their whirl. Now certainly has his work cut out for him. We can see he already does not have access to Shield Wall. Last Stand is down now, likely playing the Bolster talent. So once that goes down, he won't have access to block uptime, making sure to pull up those shield block charges as well. And now finally using his Spell Reflect as well, so he's completely out of cooldowns, and the trash is still at 40-ish% health. No Girls Allowed gets out of that room with a substantial pull on their own. Quite squeaky clean here, 41% trash, and they pull the Guardian Elemental on top of the trash here, so they're actually cleaving everything down together.
This could be very, very dangerous. This is something where, essentially, if you're doing a pull like this, you're locking your healer off. Your healer does need to be focusing on as much healing as they can possibly be doing. The one thing that I love, this little play from Zalia here. Zalia, when he came into this pack, he started off very offensive. And then he realized as he moved in, okay, maybe I need to pull back a little bit. You know, it's very fun as a healer just to go in and just do as much damage as you can, but you need to know when to do it. You need to pick your moments. You need to make sure that you're not going to put anyone in danger. And he did this absolutely perfectly here. He made sure that Now was completely fine. He made sure that everybody was in that rune. And once everybody was in the rune from Runecarver Sorn, and they had that 75% DR, he went, yep, you know what, I can pull back off now. Lovely play.
Yeah,
lovely job.
I mean, just really impressive here from No Girls Allowed. The Guardian Elemental down, no casualties, no cheat death procs even for any of the rogues. Everything nice and clean. They're starting to move across the bridge. 51% trash done already versus Method EU's 48%. Now we're going to see if they opt to skip the Elemental. It looks like that's exactly what they'll do as the rest of the group runs right by, with Now pulling the mob to the side, leaps in, and of course they use their Shadow Meld, picking everything up together, being careful not to DPS just yet. They want to get rid of that enchanted emissary out of the group. You could see just how much damage it does. It reflects 200% damage of any mob caught within that area. So Gingy kind of nuked himself down to 30% HP there, but fortunately they have managed to deal with it as they kill some of the trash here. No Girls Allowed has already aggressively moved up to the boss and pulled a bunch of trash with it, Sierra.
They have done this. I just want to look at No Girls Allowed again. And to be fair, this is the case on the side of Method EU as well when they get there. This is basically a full melee comp. You know, obviously the Resto Druid can stand back and they can be doing the healing. But as you've seen from Zalia, and actually to be fair, on the side of Adel as well, she's doing everything she can to be pushing that damage. They need to be in cat form. They need to be in melee. On a boss like this as well, you really want to say to your to your DPS, don't do anything stupid. Don't stop me from doing damage. Don't put me in a position.
Fat chance on that one, Sierra. I don't think that's going to happen.
I mean, you just got to get your DPS in shape. You got to get the whip out, you know? Back in my day, that's what we did. We just told them, no, you're not going to do it. We didn't just sit there and take... Well, actually, most people did. They didn't let themselves DPS. I'm intrigued to see what Zalia can pull here. It's interesting. Adel's doing more damage. Zalia is the more offensive healer. But Adel is actually taking a bit of a lead here on the damage.
Yeah, but
see how that plays out.
Yeah, we'll see how it plays out. But they also did different pulls, right? They had No Girls Allowed quite aggressively pulled a bunch of trash on top of the boss, so you benefit from some of that cleave with the thrashes coming out of kitty form and just benefiting with the dot as well. Whereas Method EU just kind of dealt with a massive trash pack in front of the boss and then went in for the kill. So 61% for Method EU. No third Reaping Wave, of course. We are over that hill at this point in the third season. So Method EU has now slightly pulled ahead on trash, but are quite substantially behind on the boss as Gale Caller Faye has now fallen for No Girls Allowed, and the rest of the fight is honestly a bit of a snooze fest once it's just Iron Hall. So teams like to usually at least try to get a bit creative and maybe aggressively pull some trash on top of this, or at least prep one of those enforcers, Sierra.
I mean, we do see Adel has gone out of range here. Not sure which way she's gone. Probably gone over to the next trash pack. You can see her coming back in now. Is that going to be a Ritualist?
Yeah, there's a Ritualist and an Enforcer there, looks like. Well, I mean, I see a bunch of skeletons, so I assume there's a Ritualist.
So the thing about the Ritualist here, it is possible to not have this mob come over. So essentially, you've got this little lip. You can see where the Ritualist is there, just at the back. It will stay there as long as Adel stays in the right position. She needs to keep distance away. If she moves even a fraction, she makes a tiny step, that mob is going to stop casting and it's going to move towards her. So she needs to be really careful with where she's placing herself. But if she does just like right there, tiny little movement, and there she's just doing these tiny little left-right steps, and that Ritualist is going to come even closer and closer and closer. And if it does get too close and the group aren't paying attention, they won't be able to stop it, they won't be able to interrupt it, and it could end up just doing too much damage. I don't think it would cause them too much hassle, but it would be rather annoying to deal with.
Yeah, last thing you need in the group is a spiking AoE damage that increases the damage every successful cast. Here we see finally Unending Darkness getting interrupted there by Dilemma as he runs in, and the DPS, the melee, including the tank, will make sure to rotate and interrupt rotation on this Ritualist. Now, you know what's interesting here, Sierra, as well, is that Season 2 meta called for just skipping all of this trash after the second boss, save maybe an aggressive Enforcer pull, but nobody ever dealt with this Ritualist. So interesting to see here that now, should they wipe, you actually have the shortcut opened up from Accuseer over to that kind of torch lantern we see in the background there from one of our observers, just unfortunately went off screen. But on the flip side, you've also killed all the mini-bosses, so you can quite safely get through. So a lot less hassle or danger with wiping in the dungeon. But certainly, wiping is the last thing you want to do against a team like Method EU, who still finds themselves a fair bit behind, still 10% on Brother Iron Hall, and they've not seemed to have prepped any aggressive pull post this boss, as No Girls Allowed just grabs everything together. There's 4 Enforcers in there. That is a lot of spike damage on Trell right now. Still holding on to his shield wall, though, goes sub 20% and finally commits the shield wall, starts moving around, getting away from these mobs within the 8 seconds he has left, and moves away entirely as Ursul's Vortex goes down from Edelweiss to make sure that it buys some space for Trell to get away, but still maintain interrupts on that Ritualist.
Just looking inside of Method EU here, what you're noticing is they're pulling the pack that No Girls Allowed are currently doing, but they've also got a couple of Enforcers from slightly further ahead just to bulk up that count. It is teaming these to make sure they're killing lots of mobs, getting lots of percentage. I don't want to knock them because I feel like that they are doing extremely well right now, but No Girls Allowed just dealing with that one Ritualist on its own. I feel like maybe they could have found something else to pull with it. One thing I'd love to see teams do, and this isn't really something that has particularly been explored in the MDI yet, is with those lanterns that you mentioned, what you can actually do is you can use those lanterns like the same way you use the ones at the beginning of the dungeon. You can snap mobs onto that. So if there are mobs, say, across the other side, close towards Aquasir, you can drag those mobs over. So potentially you could skip those early mobs, and then what they could have done is then use those mobs, brought them over onto the side with that Ritualist, and just bulk that pull up a little bit more. Just make it so it wasn't one mob on its own, because as you can see, Method EU, in the same way that No Girls Allowed, took the opportunity they gave them early in the game, Method EU have now responded with, well, you've given us an opportunity to go forward, and we're going to take it.
They're going to take it, and they're quite neck and neck right now as one of the Rip Mine casts leaks out for No Girls Allowed. Trell does take a big chunk of damage, but manages to stay alive. Does have the shield wall available to them once again here, as damage sprays left and right on the group, on the team of No Girls Allowed. Edelweiss doing what she can to make sure to stabilize the condition, as Method EU has already chiseled through the tentacle pack and is technically pulled slightly ahead in the dungeon, but they do have that 3-death buffer to overcome. So if they win and no other deaths come in throughout this dungeon, they're going to have to win by at least 15 seconds above No Girls Allowed, who has now mass stealthed and already headed over into the room of Lord Stormsong, getting ready to start that RP as they cleave down these dwellers, the lashers on the side.
I'm just leaning in over the desk here, checking that Adel did proc that roleplay. It can take a very long time to get that done. Very, very long time. So it's important that it doesn't have to be the healer. Typically it's the healer. You can have your tank heroic leap in as well. Just get that roleplay going, finish off these tentacles. They have nothing else to do. There's nothing in this room. It's just them, little swimming pool, a couple tentacles. So they need to be entertaining themselves for a while whilst the boss does spawn. One thing, again, I'd love to see teams try and do. On the bridge, the mob stage just skipped, there is a snap spot. As you can see on the boss here, these little two pillars to the left and right. That one on the left there, the sort of swirly line, I don't know what you want to call it, if it's a tentacle, I guess we'll call it a tentacle.
Quite accurate description, swirly line.
The swirly line of stone. But if they do go onto that, then any mobs will snap spot there. It's just a nice, easy way of getting mobs across. Again, just beef out the pull. As long as you play this one properly, it's not that dangerous, but we've seen this boss go very, very wrong.
Yeah, and the problem with snapping as well is it's not exactly a technique that is hard-coded to work properly, so we've seen snaps fail quite miserably sometimes when intended to do just that and try to get the mobs in range. We've had evasion issues with them, so perhaps it's either something they don't know about or something that they do know about and choose not to use. No Girls Allowed, of course, has dealt with the second Dweller pack, which was also comprised of a Tides emissary in there, so the lashes were non-interruptible, which actually forced Dilemma to use his Cloak of Shadows prior to the pack dying, so he will not have that as a preventative measure to try and avoid the mind control here on Lord Stormsong. So just less chance that somebody kind of gets to maintain their damage on the boss, and looks like they've slightly pulled ahead. It's tough to say. I mean, they're a couple percent ahead on the boss, but they're a few percent behind on Trash, and they have the 3-death difference. This is going to be a pretty close one by the end of this.
I mean, really, at this point, I'm not really looking at this boss, to be honest. I'm thinking about the next one. I'm thinking about that juicy buff on the healer, 180% extra damage. And this is why throughout the dungeon, I've kind of been talking about, them playing more offensively versus defensively. On the side of No Girls Allowed, Sistara proccing the cheat death there, Dilemma going kind of low. But that's where, Adel's basically going to go, I don't mind doing a bit of healing. I'm not going to shout at you to use your defenses. I'm not going to shout at you to use a health pot, Healthstone. I'm totally fine to deal with that. And you see it reflected in the damage meter. Zalia just slightly ahead. And that's kind of been the theme throughout the entire dungeon. Adel's playing it a little bit safe, but they are getting through the dungeon. They're getting through it at a good pace. They don't have any deaths, as you say, compared to the Method EU side who do. But on this final boss, it really will be all about the damage that the healer can do, how they play around that, and I honestly think that Zayla's going to do more. But you know what? I would love Adel to surprise us and just go vicious. Just go absolutely savage, beast mode right at the end, and just do as much damage as possible and win the game for them.
Well, I mean, if she decides to DPS, she has to go Savage Beast mode because she has to go in cat form, so there's no other choice for that, as No Girls Allowed right now has just fallen behind. They were a few percent above in the 60s range, but now Method EU just stomping and storming through as Lord Stormsong falls for them, and No Girls Allowed still has 14% left on the boss, so Method EU doing whatever they can to claw back into action, and knowing that they need to overcome that 15-second difference because of the 3 deaths sloppily at the beginning of the dungeon. Speaking of deaths, the star goes down. As Sierra mentioned earlier, did proc that cheat death mid-fight, so that is a costly death for them, especially when it's this close between the two teams. Lord Stormsong about to fall here for No Girls Allowed. And now that 15-second difference between the teams has been shaved down to 10 as Method EU starts to peruse on through the jellyfish lane underwater here and get into Vikoth's room. Not Vikoth.
They do it.
Vikoth's Siege. That was messed up, guys.
I wasn't going to mention it, but that's fine. We styled it out. I mean, we've all been there with those jellyfish. The very first time we saw them, I can't be the only one who said, I wonder what this does, let me go and touch it. And found out the hard way that's not what you want to do. We do see Adel going into the beautiful non-dolphin form here, choosing not to do a little dance, but just a graceful glide towards the boss. She's getting ready. She's mentally prepping herself for this final boss. We do see Method EU grabbing some eels nice and early. Now, there is a choice that you can make here. You can either do these before the boss. It seems like they're just going to drag a couple onto the boss, just make a nice little easy bit of pad for the DPS there. Or you can choose to wait until the healer does have that buff. And then once you come out of that downstairs phase, you can grab him in, you've got the extra damage. The healers don't really want to risk going into melee, though, at that point. It can be kind of costly, but you can still do the Sunfire spam. You know, it's 2 druids on either side, so it's not like one's a paladin where you'd have to go into melee to do consecration. They do have the Sunfire option available to them there. Seems like No Girls Allowed doing something very, very similar, just grabbing some abyssal eels in to make the pool very interesting. This Method EU go into the very first down phase.
Into the very first down phase, and you know, Method EU's shown that they have just superior single target damage versus No Girls Allowed, and in the previous series where we saw Shrine of the Storm, one of the big shortcomings of the team was actually not one-phasing the boss. So it didn't matter so much in that series as they were already so far ahead, but here with Method EU not being too far ahead and still needing to overcome 10 seconds, it might come down to which team can actually manage, if any, to one-phase the boss. That could be the winning team right there, because that is a massive time sink needing to deal with this intermission. As Method EU finally gets out of this intermission, Zaylia is now stacked to 9 for that extra damage, and they start interrupting the 2 Forgotten Denizens, cleaving it on top of the Sunken, taking advantage of that damage buff before they return, and we see if they one-phase it or not, Sierra.
They do indeed. Now this, for a healer, this is probably my favorite boss and my least favorite boss simultaneously. It's absolutely just a blast to do. You get to do so much damage on this boss, but you are basically relying on your DPS to keep you safe. In the same way, it's kind of role reversal. Usually the DPS is saying, well, I'm going to stand in all the mechanics and you're going to heal me. At this point, the healer's now saying, I need you to not take damage so that I can just do as much damage as possible. And like I said, Zaylia just absolutely smashing. I don't think he's doing as much as Smok was.
Perhaps
that number, but
perhaps not. I don't remember the numbers. Well, I mean, we can always check that later. But Method EU here, halfway through their Bloodlust, and Volzith only at 39% HP. It's going to be pretty close again. I mean, I think in the previous series they were shy by maybe 3%, 4%. It was very, very close. So if any team can do it, it's Method EU with their single target damage. Fortunately, we don't have eyes on the energy of the boss, but we'll see that Sunken City cast once they start reaching that 100 energy. No Girls Allowed following suit has now popped their Bloodlust as well. They did have Volzith 2% lower going in the transition phase, so it is something that might work in their favor. But Method EU here trying to cap out the one phase, and fortunately not even close, even further than the previous one. 9% left on the boss, and I think both teams at this point are likely going to have to deal with a second transition, Sarah.
I was going to say, it's all eyes on No Girls Allowed at the moment. Will they be able to push out enough damage? I don't want to be pessimistic. I'm not 100% sure they're doing quite enough. I'd love them. I really would love them to just take this game. But for me, it just comes down to that one ritualist where they did that on their own, and they had that advantage and they gave it away. If they could have just bulked up that pool a tiny bit more, just kept the momentum going, you know, they had it from start to finish. They were in the lead pretty much all the time. It's not over, though. It is not over, but Adel has just gone down, so they have just lost that buff. We've seen in one of the previous series, the Rest of Druid's Mock did go down, and they still managed to finish the boss. But at this point, in the same way that Method EU at the beginning, it was just a little bit sloppy and gave them a chance to get ahead, this is the same thing. You end up with the rest of Druid going down, there's nobody that can res them, and Method EU are just going to capitalize this, finish up the heals here, and then they will take this game.
I mean, they're going to take the game, and what a throwaway, unfortunately, by No Girls Allowed, who was looking to be fairly dominant, but just shaved that 15-second advantage jack down to, well, eventually 5 seconds, and it just wasn't enough, especially with Edelweiss going down at the end.
It definitely wasn't enough, and we haven't seen teams be able to crank out just enough damage to be able to get that one phase, and that was really the marker that they were trying to hit and fully commit to, is if they were going to be able to get that extra damage, if they were able to get that one phase, they would have been in prime position to be able to take that entire game, but Tettles just wasn't enough, and for a team like No Girls Allowed, they did really well considering their seeding and who they were playing against.
Yeah, so Method EU was kind of stompy last season of MDI. They actually won pretty much all of the cups in pretty decisive fashion, not even dropping any matches here. But you actually saw some major issues from the beginning for Method EU, bleeding out a couple of deaths. No Girls Allowed here capitalizing and playing like they ended up wanting to win. They ended up actually pulling all 3 mini bosses over the course of the whole entire dungeon. You could actually see right there, they ended up pulling Windspeaker Heldis into Accuseer. They also ended up pulling just a sizable amount of trash into every single boss. They even set up the third boss, Lord Stormsong here, with some of the trash that was actually on that bridge. And they actually ended up wasting a little bit of the time pulling the boss to make sure that they actually had the trash set up properly too. So the cultist with Lord Stormsong was actually a super unique pull in that regard, but making sure that you actually get the mobs back to the boss as quickly as possible and able to actually hit the boss and start it at the exact same time Method EU would have been a major advantage for No Girls Allowed, but instead it was just a little bit slower, and that plus the Ritualist, like Salute was saying, is kind of how they squandered their lead.
Yeah, in many cases, and especially the time that it took to grab all of those mobs. There are a lot of heavy caster mobs. They put a lot of self buffs up onto themselves, so it takes forever for them to get there to begin with, and to start shaving off more time. And as you mentioned, Tettles, you know, all these little moments start coming to the point where you lose a little bit of time here and there, and you're just done for.
Yeah, and in regards to that as well, No Girls Allowed here, they actually did an insanely strong pull with the Rune Carver, very similar to what we actually saw from the side of Abracadabra, except No Girls Allowed actually pulls that corner pack into the Rune Carver as well. The Rune Carver is one of the more dangerous mobs that we haven't seen a lot of, and the reason for that being is because it does a carved flesh cast, and basically the carved flesh cast, you actually have to be in that green ward that you can actually see in the corner of the room whenever that does go on you, because it actually does an insane amount of damage if you were not inside of that ward. So No Girls Allowed there, pulling very strong, and it was definitely it was very interesting to see how they went toe-to-toe with Method EU in this matchup.
We'll have to see how it's going to go going forward, because Motherlode is the next matchup onto this one, Salute. We've seen, you know, mirror compositions coming out, same as usual, but we haven't had teams have about the same routing thus far. So we already saw how deadly the R&D wing is after those nerfs, so it seems like we're going to be getting something very similar to what we've seen in previous seasons.
Yeah, and you know, when Big X was up here, he was mentioning, and truth be told, the Method team seemed to have generally the more superior strats in Motherlode in the previous season, so you'd expect coming out of Method EU once again that we're going to see something like that. But I mean, at all costs, teams, especially if they're running the kind of meta comp that exists right now, they're going to try as best they can to just absolutely avoid at all costs any trash for the third boss or the fourth boss. Now, we saw a couple of unique pulls coming out of, for instance, Method NA, who pulled one of the robots on top of it along with the I was going to say the repairman, but Ashenist on top of it. So, you know, there might be some small quirks like this, but for the most part, I would largely expect that we're going to see just huge amounts of trash, boss, a bit of trash, and then boss, boss, boss.
Sounds good. Same as, you know, we've seen so many times. It's been what we come to know from Motherlode. So we're taking a quick break before we go on into that game 2. Don't go anywhere. The MDI will return right after this. Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International as Method EU is up 1 against No Girls Allowed as we're getting ourselves ready to go on into the Motherlode here. NGA played very closely here in that last one, Salute, and just kind of threw it away a little bit at the very end. What do you think has been like the real issue that they had such far in the last dungeon? It wasn't really too much on having any extra deaths or any side issues in terms of like their routing. It just seemed like they didn't play maybe a little aggressively enough, or
I think they were fine in aggression, and you know, a couple of slip-ups with Edelweiss at the end of the dungeon, the same kind of mirroring the issues with Method E. But I think Sierra nailed one of the major issues on the head. They lost a ton of time with that Ritualist pull, which we were kind of touting as interesting and new, because certainly we didn't see that last season. But the fact that they just dealt solo with a kind of mini boss style mob that just has so much health, and then just chewed through it at the end, it just took way too long.
And speaking on that point, Sierra, from winning last year's MDI in 2018, where does it come down to when you guys are building those routes and you start saying, this thing that I think is really cool is actually just killing us time-wise? Where does it kind of come down to that, and how much is it on practice or building the routes in MDT?
It's all in the practice time, but a lot of it as well comes from when you're not playing. Like, a lot of people don't really think about this, but...
Oh, hold that thought one moment. Trell's coming home.
Scratch that thought. Let's talk about this instead. This is way more interesting. Brewmaster, hello.
Very much hello. And
Everyone's staring at me now.
Hot trub.
And if you could see Salute now, with a proud look on
That
his
is
face.
a big beam on your face. Tell us about this Brewmaster.
Well, I mean, Brewmaster's a tank spec, and he has
Thank you so much for that one, Salute. And now as we go on into game 2 with that nice, fancy Brewmaster, Trell being very excited to be able to play this one. Game 2 right now between Method EU and No Girls Allowed. Now you can tell us about Brewmaster.
Okay, so in Brewmaster is not out of the question that, you know, we've seen it a lot in the time trials as well, Sierra. I'm sure you've been noticing that. Brewmaster provides a few benefits. Outside of the tank is very strong, smooth damage intake, etc. Not known for the burstiest of damage, but because of the Essence system with Conflict and Strife, they have access to the Hot Trub PvP talent, which gives gives them 20% damage shared amongst all mobs near them whenever they use Purify. So 20% of the Purified damage just reflects on everyone, so you can get some meaty damage out of them. As you can see, Trell actually doing a pretty substantial spike in damage at the start. So the more damage they take, the more damage they do back, essentially, is the name of it. And Sierra, of course, on top of it, they provide that physical debuff battery for the team.
Well, immediately, I'm just looking at this and I'm thinking, you know, Adel in the last dungeon, we spoke about maybe not being as offensive as potentially she could have been. If you look at the healing that now and Trell are doing, Trell is, you know, he takes a lot more damage, but he's also doing a lot more healing. This can allow Edelweiss to be way more offensive. But I love the Brewmaster play. But these rogues are dropping very, very low. Gingy and Dilemma both propping cheat death here.
I mean, Dilemma had 4 stacks of the cast from the Void Emissary there, so anything is going to get one shot through that. Fortunately, he did have his cheat death available, and as you mentioned, 1 rogue apiece. Now, no cheat death for 6 minutes for them. But, you know, with the Brewmaster, I mean, you see a substantial amount of HPS on the meter actually topping Edelweiss, and that's because a large part of it is their Celestial Fortune, where the amount of crit they have actually gives them a chance to get increased healing from all sources that counts as their healing. So, quite greedy of them, I might add, but all of that Celestial Fortune proc healing that comes from Edelweiss is actually counted as the Brewmaster's healing, which is just a passive effect, so just helps you heal them up more, even though in order to kind of counter that increased damage that they take through stagger and just being generally a bit squishy in terms of armor percent, but we do know, of course, the work stagger does to mitigate and smooth out that damage, transforming it into that damage over time effect over 10 seconds, unless talented otherwise. Method EU here, 13% on the board with Trash as they chew through their typical composition that we saw on the previous map, is No Girls Allowed 15% on the board, not far behind at all. And both teams looking nice and healthy right now. 1 battle rest for each still remaining.
One thing that's interesting to note, and we were talking about this briefly in the break, Bloodlust. Just as I bring it up, actually, No Girls Allowed do use their Bloodlust. I was intrigued to see what they were going to use it on. What were they saving it for? Dilemma is dropping very, very low here, you know, even with that Bloodlust. And Dilemma actually does go down. I think that may have been an explosive wall going off. Undead going
Another
down. Star proccing cheat death. Undead proccing cheat death as well. And, you know, this is with Bloodlust up. You know, if they had, I was going to say potentially I would have liked them to use it earlier, like in the same way that Method EU did. But I think if they didn't use it there, potentially we could have been seeing a bit of a nasty situation unfolding.
But yeah, nasty situation indeed. And, you know, just looking over, Trell's still using the same trinkets. We're going to see this whole Urchin/Edict play from tanks quite frequently this season. It is a very defensive play. I mean, you have benefit from the large amount of primary stat that are on these trinkets, but they're largely defensive. One is just an absorb. You can choose the physical or the magic absorb, and the other is just that HPS healing over time, every 3-second component that I mentioned earlier. So they're not benefiting a huge amount of damage from this on either side. But once again, you know, Trell's just kind of consistent damage with that hot trub, and just a bit of danger there, unfortunately, as Dilemma did go down, and those sloppy explosive orbs cost Sistara and Undad their proc on cheat death for the rest, not the rest of the dungeon, but for 6 minutes now. So, you know, Sierra, you're new here, but you've seen in previous seasons, you've been part of it yourself in previous seasons. That small slip-up might not seem like much to the naked eye, you know, just in Twitch chat watching right now, being like, that's fine, they proc their cheat death, but that comes back to bite you in the butt later on.
I mean, this is the thing, when you looked at the cheat death that the Dilemma procs. And
as I was saying,
I don't even need to finish my point because they're doing it perfectly for me and explaining it. I was literally just about to say, you know, you proc a cheat death early when you don't really, you know, it was just a bit of sloppy play. I kind of fell asleep at the wheel, and then I got, you know, hit by 4 void sacks, and that's not really falling asleep at the wheel. Literally, we don't even need to mention this because they are just showing it perfectly. All of these rogues, they're proccing it early, and then when they actually need it, they are dying. Trell's going down here on the side of No Girls Allowed. This is a bit of a mess. I'm not going to lie.
This is an absolute mess. A bit less messy for Method EU, but it's funny. I mean, the one rogue that didn't have the cheat death available on the side of Method EU was the rogue that was targeted by things like the Inhale Vapors, post-Inhale Vapors charge, and of course the Grease Gun from the Mech Jockey. So Gingy did drop. They committed their res to it. He's back up. No Girls Allowed has not committed a battle res at all. So they still have that working in their favor. Method EU does not have one available for about 5 minutes now, but No Girls Allowed essentially had a full wipe with 5 deaths on the board.
It's such a shame to see. It really is such a shame. You know, when we look at how No Girls Allowed were playing in the last dungeon, I wouldn't necessarily, you know, it wasn't a dominant lead, but they were ahead for the vast majority of the dungeon. Then there was that one tiny slip-up, as we were talking about, you know, that one tiny slip-up can affect you massively. Sistara, I'm not sure what is happening with you, but you are dying a lot, my friend. And, you know, we talk about it, when we've said it about several times now. These cheat deaths, they can't be proccing them on random stuff. They don't need to, because we can see that these DPSs, they're taking huge amounts of damage, even with Adel playing so defensively. And you can see, you know, she's not really doing much on the damage, and that's because the DPS aren't allowing her to do that. And we kind of saw that as well in the earlier series with Fly Me Out, where, you know, the Paladin was playing, Elsmith was playing very offensively, and you need your DPS to be helping you on that front. Adel going down, Dilemma going down, Trell likely going to be going down in a second.
Yeah.
This isn't going how they want to at all.
No,
I think
I
they just need to regroup, refocus, and just get back into this.
I mean, this is sloppy here from No Girls Allowed right now, as Edelweiss releases, Dilemma releases, and they start running back to the point of their death, essentially. Trell is already playing so defensive, running off, vivifying on top of it. I believe he procced Undulating Tides. I'm not really sure if that's the best call for a tank to be playing Undulating Tides. I'll have to check in on the Azerite gear that he's wearing, so I'll just peek over next time Sierra takes over here in a moment. Now actually going down on Method E. They don't have the battle res available, and it looks they're actually going to make a heads-up call to immediately drop aggro. Excellent recovery and heads-up play here by Method EU. As they say, our tank's dead. We don't have a battle res. It's going to be a while T returns. We're going to just vanish. We're going to shadow meld. We're going to res him, and we're going to go and kill the remaining half of that trash. No Girls Allowed now back in action at 11 deaths on the board, and still looking to chisel through some of the trash as they actually use a mass stealth to a more central area so they can congregate everything and pull it together, or not. They're just going for the boss, looks like. Either way, we'll see exactly where they end up. I thought they were going to pull some trash, but they're just going straight into the boss room here, Sierra.
Now, when we talk about how Method EU are playing, you know, it's these tiny little mistakes, and this is kind of the running theme in this dungeon, these tiny mistakes that happen very early on that come to bite you back, come and bite you back later. If they were playing a different team, and obviously they're not playing a different team, but if they were playing one of these teams that they're sort of, you know, trying to face off against, you know, Method NA, Abracadabra, they would not let them get away with that. You know, that would not be something where those teams would be going, yeah, that's fine, you know, we're just going to make a little mistake here as well. Those teams are looking at playing very, very well. 0 death runs that we've seen so far today from Abra. We're seeing the Abra that we want to see. The Method EU currently that we're seeing is not the one that we want to see. You know, from the very start of the series, I was sort of talking about, this is almost a confidence builder. You know, they did get knocked down by Method NA in the spring finals. I think that hit them confidence-wise. And to be honest, it's showing, it's leaking through into their gameplay now, and they just need to shake it off and just get out of that mentality straight away. You can't be going in with this negative mindset. You need to be going in thinking, yeah, you know what, we're going to do this, we're going to win. But when you're in that situation, you know, we're watching it and we're talking about it, it's very easy for us to sit here, you know, we're relaxed, you know, we've got our drinks, we're chilling. They aren't doing that. They're sat at home, they're playing. The pressure's on. The pressure is really on. I almost think at this point, I don't know, it feels like neither of these two teams are particularly thinking about the dungeon that they're in. It almost feels like they're sort of an autopilot, just going through the motions, and there's something slightly, you know, different happens, they just don't react to it.
Okay, I'm a very confused here. I'm a confused boy right now. Trell has been rezzed. They're actually at the minefield at Azrock right now, and No Girls Allowed with 12 deaths on the board. I guess they're doing the dungeon backwards, or from the midpoint. It looks like they're getting ready to pull Azrock first with 30% trash on the board. So wildly, potentially...
Well, going even.
No, not even. Definitely wildly innovative here. Now, whether or not it's positively or negatively innovative, we'll just see here in a moment as Dilemma decides to eat a bomb to the face on the side. Just didn't have a pre-run snack, so decides just to have a bit of damage here as Edelweiss takes it nice and slow down the tracks right now. Method E already working on the first boss right now as coin-operated Crowd Pummeler is left in the middle for the first coin piles to go down, and then immediately moved out by now to make sure that none of those coins are absorbed, giving the boss a permanent 10% damage buff per stack. As they run through the trash here, No Girls Allowed is already at Rixa Flux, question mark.
Maybe somebody needs to just message Adel and just remind her this is a speed run. This isn't this isn't a fashion show. Not showing show off transforms here. There was, if I remember correctly, and this was way back. We're talking beta here. There was a strat where you would use a bit of a bugged reset, bugged respawn, and you would end up. This is the way you would do this dungeon. You know, you do the third boss, you do the fourth boss, you take the car back around, and you'd essentially play it from the halfway point onwards. That hasn't been a thing for, geez, I can't even think how long that's not been a thing for. Like you say, I I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what they're doing.
I mean, No Girls Allowed is just bringing sexy back right now as they start on the third boss, strikes the Flux Flame. They've already, they also marked some of the trash there just before with some of the, well, dangerous trash in the R&D wing, so I'm not sure if they're planning to kind of pull that on top of the boss with cooldowns or something. Nothing of that sort's been done just yet, as Method EU sticking to their usual, more traditional route here of 80-ish, so yeah, indeed 83% trash for them. They down the coin-operated Crowd Pummeler, deal with it, and immediately a stealth comes up, making sure to tightly hug the right side as there is a Void Emissary there that does see through stealth. They do have True Sight, so making sure that they kind of dance around that and then pull 3 packs, actually only 2 packs together with the patrol and just cleave it down.
Now, at this point, it would be interesting to hear the Method EU comms. If that was a thing we could do, I'd love to jump into their comms and see what they're thinking right now. Because typically, a lot of people have this idea...
Method EU, not No Girls Allowed with what they're doing right now?
No, this is the thing. I want to hear Method EU's comms. Because typically, what we see is... I think everyone kind of has this idea that teams will change things on the fly. This idea that, you know, oh, they have the stream open on the second monitor, you know, oh, we're going to do things slightly differently. That doesn't really tend to happen. You know, you need to practice, you need to have a set route, you need to go through the motions. I am very intrigued to see what Method EU are thinking. Are they thinking, actually, you know what, let's scale these pulls down? Because we don't need to show off our strats. We don't need to show the teams for later games what potentially we're going to be doing. We don't want to give it away for them. So we're just going to sort of tone it down a bit. No Girls Allowed, 65 seconds on the death there. Method EU really don't need to be going all guns blazing. They could take it from 100%, drag it down to sort of maybe, you know, 70, 80. They don't need to be going on full charge. I mean, the No Girls Allowed comms would be very interesting. At this point, I think they're probably aware that they might not win this.
I mean,
they might know.
I think they might know, but anything can happen. We've seen, ironically, on this map of all maps with the powerhouse that Method EU was last season, this is a map that they had horrible chokes on as well, with the kind of bomb area post-Azerok. I mean, they had 19 deaths. I remember Zalia bouncing around like a beach ball between some of those mines, but, you know, so it happens. It can happen, so I wouldn't say No Girls Allowed should just give up and stop doing this properly. Maybe they're using it as a bit of an opportunity to explore an alternative strat. They already saw that they were down at the beginning and said, hey, let's try that plan B that we haven't really practiced, but let's see it through and let's see how it works out. But right now, I mean, Mogul Razdunk has been pulled, the 4th boss of the dungeon, technically the last boss, usually the last boss, but teams can, of course, circle back around with the little minecart ride to restart from the beginning of the dungeon if they want. So 30% trash on the board. Mogul Razdunk, 80% just about to be for No Girls Allowed, whilst Method EU with the traditional routing has 98% trash at Azerok, who is currently 85%.
Yeah, as I say, strong performance from Method EU, but again, it's those tiny mistakes, and they do add up at the end of the day. I'm just checking No Girls Allowed. It's not unusual positioning. It's just typically what we do tend to see teams do is they either just drag it around the place. They're either going to watch out for those boombers. There'll be 2 of them. They'll be facing in a I think it's a 2x3 grid that they're going to be facing down 2 of those lanes, and they'll just sort of move on the fly. Or there is a spot which is, I think Trell's sitting in it right now, actually.
Yeah.
Where you just never tend to end up with anything there. It seems like they're going to be trying to use that one.
But it's also important to know the reason they dragged it to the entrance is because you can actually step down the stairs just a bit, and you're completely immune to any AoEs there too. So you can see actually the Rogues and Edelweiss sitting on the couple of last few steps before he reaches platform, before those Boomba bots went off, and they were just completely void and safe of any AoE there. So I guess they discovered or innovated a separate immunity spot. Now the danger there is you're technically out of bounds, so if you're targeted by an ability right after those Boomba bots go out, you can technically despawn the boss. We've seen that kind of slip up happen on Razan. Razan's a good example. Somebody running up, trying to grab one of the Sky Screamers, gets targeted, does it at the wrong time. Razan just despawns as he tries to go up the stairs to grab them. So got to be really careful with that kind of stuff. Clever play, but can be quite costly if it doesn't work out. No Girls Allowed here, just to check in, of course, is now dealing with their transition phase on Mogul Razdunk, has actually just finished that and pulled him back to the entrance of the room so that they can DPS him down in these essentially safe zones where they don't have to move the boss from and just maximize damage. Method EU has finished off Azerok, and we see the team running down through the minefield and getting ready to skip onto Flux Flame.
One thing to highlight there, Adel actually took the homing missile and ran it completely out of the room, made sure that nobody actually got hit by that. Again, sort of comparing the way that different healers like to play. Ellesmere basically just says the complete opposite of sort of most healers' mentality. Just take it to the face. Just take it, I'm going to heal through it. Doesn't really do that much damage. But when you look at how some of these DPSs on the side of No Girls Allowed are dealing with this Gatling gun, they're taking maybe 1 or 2 ticks they don't necessarily need to, playing a little bit greedy, playing a little bit sloppy, but they are going to be getting the boss down now. He's going to jump out of his little mech robot. They'll be able to finish him off very quickly, and they are going to be running towards the entrance of the dungeon. There is a little car here, a little jazzy ride, which you don't typically tend to see. I think it was more designed as a way to get you out of the dungeon as opposed to something which you would use in a run to get you around it. It's nice, but right now, they're not doing anything. They're not killing bosses, they're not getting trash count, they're having to sit and wait, and now they're going to have to regroup and get back into it. It's a little bit of downtime.
I mean, yeah, it's cool to see, but the amount of travel time they wasted just doing this kind of roundabout around the entire dungeon, not only that cart ride, but also just skipping to the third boss without killing anything along the way is very, very time inefficient. So the amount of aggression they're going to need to have on packs and really no relative gain to the efficiency of how they kill things by starting with the third and the fourth boss before the first two. I'm not really sure worth here, almost at all.
This is the thing, right?
Dilemma's down.
Yes. And this is the thing we saw. When they used their first Bloodlust came up, it was on the pack that's just slightly off of the horizon, and we did see 1 or 2 of their rogues go down, and they've come back round to where, you know, most teams will typically use their first Bloodlust. They've used it, and a rogue's gone down. You can't be dying during Blood... I mean, you shouldn't be dying at all, to be perfectly honest, but especially during that Bloodlust, that's your window of opportunity where you want to be maximizing your damage, you're going to have that haste bonus, you're going to be doing huge amounts, and you're dying. That's not what you want to be doing at all. And again, it's a very strange pathing. Adel doing the same thing she did earlier. I think they're just having a bit of fun right now. I think they're kind of aware of what's happening. As I say, maybe they've got the stream open. They can see that Mythic EU is ahead. They're heading towards the final boss now, 100% count. That's all they need to do. So they're just chilling. They're having a bit of fun. As you say, maybe giving us a little tour of the dungeon, seeing the hidden spots that we never get to see.
Yeah, I mean, this is I mean, it just started Sloppy Joe's here for No Girls Allowed, and it just didn't work out for them. So, you know, maybe they're exploring their plan B. They're having a bit of fun with it. Nonetheless, they're still going at it in the dungeon, and Method EU, all eyes on them right now, as they have indeed gone to the final boss of the dungeon, Mogul Razdunk. We've seen him now pull the boss to one of the quadrants that is safe from the boom bots, as the entire battlefield gets rained down on with missiles from those bots. Gatling guns starting to rotate in a clockwise fashion as the team avoids it. It's really only a matter of time here before Method EU takes this match.
For sure, and it's nice to see that, certainly from the outset, it seems like Method EU are playing this boss very clean, and this is something they're going to need to do going forward. And I'm hoping that taking this victory, you know, I mean, technically we're assuming they're going to win. It would be very surprising if they didn't win. Maybe something crazy could happen, but I highly doubt that. However, this might give them a bit of a confidence boost. Even though it wasn't necessarily the cleanest game, it's a win. And a win's a win. Just as you progress through that bracket, you gain a bit more confidence. You beat one team, you go, yeah, you know what? We got that win under our belt. And then you move to the next team, and you beat them, and you move on and on and on. And hopefully it doesn't get to the point where they run out of steam like last time.
Let's hang on a second here, though. Yeah, this is a nice confidence booster. Not the confidence 100% that they want to see. They did have a bit of sloppiness in both of these dungeons, but the next team that they're going up against is Method NA. So it's not exact. You know, it's the guys that caused your pride to take a hit in the first place. So it's not a team that they can just kind of rummage through and regain passively some of their pride that they lost there at the Cup. Edelweiss going down here for No Girls Allowed yet again. But, you know, hopefully they're rejuvenated from it, but we're having a kind of re-clash of the Titans here later on today.
It's definitely a game that, I mean, you know, I asked Now about it, and he said they focused a little bit on that second series. It wasn't the only thing they practiced. Obviously, they did practice all the dungeons. Maybe they practiced a little bit harder on that series than they thought they did. You know, maybe they just went, we don't need to practice that hard against this team. The first dungeon that No Girls Allowed did, though, they could have taken it, and this could have gone to a game 3. I would have loved to see that. I would have loved to see, you know, these underdog teams, these little pups going, you know what? We're not going to give you an easy time. We are going to, you know, we're going to take games from you. And unfortunately, they didn't manage to do it in the first one. And this one, I mean, it wasn't even one moment. The whole thing kind of just fell apart before it even started, really, which is a shame.
Quite early on, as Method EU is sealing the deal here, taking the series 2-0 and rewriting the team as no wins allowed.
Wow, that was pretty good. Were you working on the whole series?
I've been thinking about it.
He's got a little pad of notes here. He's just been writing puns the whole time.
Oh, he probably has like a little notepad under his bed where he's just been writing notes in the dead of night. Well, Method EU.
It's a usual thing. Should see what's on the backside of this page.
Method EU taking the 2-0 sweep onto that one throughout the Motherlode, and it was pretty disappointing out of NGA that they didn't have more of a set route or anything like that prepared for it, because I was really excited to start seeing some Brewmaster action, because I know Trell definitely wanted to get in on that. But Method EU playing their game did very well here, Tettles.
I mean, even at the beginning, No Girls Allowed was actually doing some very interesting stuff. They used the Ring of Peace to be able to get these Peacekeepers piloted by these mech jockeys. Of course, you have to have like some knockback or a Ring of Peace of sorts to be able to do that. But then you actually see Edel going down to the Charged Claw from the Peacekeeper, just getting evaporated off the map. And then once that ended up happening, it was just like the Method EU show. Method EU took a pretty commanding lead for the most of the rest of the dungeon. Just in general, they ended up killing coin-operated crowd pummeler very quickly, and they actually end up just having a very clean run in Method EU style fashion. They do end up having 2 deaths, now ended up going down whenever they were actually doing some of the trash towards the very beginning of the match, but overall they were actually able to recover pretty easily. And No Girls Allowed is doing Mogul Razdunk with 30% trash count, while Method EU is already on Azarok, like with like almost full count, and then Method EU again just taking a commanding lead here and just pulling out the dungeon fairly clean, just in typical Method EU fashion. So it's definitely going to be an interesting Method v Method matchup, very similar to what we saw a lot last season.
Yep, and like Sue mentions, that Clash of the Titans as the match that we always want to be keeping a close eye on, and I think it might actually be the most frequent matchup that we've seen throughout any of the different seasons. They're constantly meeting up against each other, constantly going up against each other to be playing for it.